I think the demand for intentional, inclusive, healthy community is obvious. People naturally want to be parts of communities that are inclusive, that are fulfilling, that nurture them, that help them kind of find themselves and then kind of ultimately grow into their truest self and have the most authentic relationship with the divine and with one another that one can. I think that there's a very real demand for that. The supply question, I think, is where the challenge lies, or maybe where the conversation is really most accurately looked at. And when you begin talking about third space, third place, it naturally becomes juxtaposed with the masjid. And when I say naturally, I don't mean that I believe that's the correct positioning, but I think that it's just a result of like the Muslim community tends to think of itself vis-a-vis the masjid. And so then if you talk about the supply of meaningful community, of intentional community, then we begin to measure that conversation against the masjid. And for all of the critique, for all of the challenges, for all of the pain and the beauty of the masjid experience, the kind of meta-narrative of the masjid, particularly in the West, I think we have to be honest in saying that the missing piece is applying proper thought, resources, and investment in intentional community planning. So there's a difference between saying, hey, we show up to a place and it's like, well, we need a place to pray. And so we start a place to pray. And then the community grows and then we say, well, we need a bigger place to pray because now there's more people. And then we begin having kids. And so we say, well, we need to also have a space and programming for kids, and we need to have an Islamic school. And then we begin to think about the kind of supplementary things, the halal restaurant, fill in the blank of things that ultimately kind of buttress that core. There's a difference between making it up as you go along and thinking intelligently and thinking strategically about all of the needs, all of the challenges, and the feasibility of what building a community really is. So I think that the reason I'm revisiting and in a very real way kind of just re-examining and trying to deeper my understanding around the third place is Ta'leef never attempted to be a third place. We weren't like, hey, we're going to start a third place, and then we named it a third place. What happened is we actually looked at what would be the best possible way for us to serve folks in the broader community that are interested in learning about Islam, creating a space that would be most nurturing for the needs of ourselves as newer Muslims, and then also making a space that was most relevant for Muslim youth as they're trying to reconnect with their faith, and watch how all of those kind of demographics merge. And what ultimately happened is that gave birth to a community, and in that process, our associate director, Suleiman Aransibi, is like, hey, Ta'leef is a third place. And I was like, well, what does that mean? And then he introduced me to Oldenburg's work. We read about it, we talked about it. We released this video, this conversation, and then Muslims begin to employ a lot of that language. I think one can contend, again, from looking at it sociologically, the masjid should be a third place in terms of the fact that it buttresses the bottom line of people's needs between home and work, and it being fulfilling. The reason people tend to think of the third place or Ta'leef as an anti-masjid movement is because there are people who are very deeply disgruntled with or are intentionally unmosking from the masjid that have, for all intents and purposes, adopted language that Ta'leef first introduced into the conversation. And those people then we become responsible for answering issues and conversations that they're having that we never had. The Prophet ﷺ said one of the people shaded by the shade of God on the day of judgment is somebody whose heart is attached to the masjid. Yalla, who doesn't want to be one of those people? That doesn't mean that there's not pain and problems and issues and stuff that needs to be done. Frankly, Ta'leef never introduced itself as a response to the masajid. It was, hey, what works best for the groups of folks that you're trying to serve? What works best for building sustainable community? And I think that we are very fortunate, by the grace of Allah, to just kind of like grow organically. And when you're trying to be something, it's different than when you just are something. I think the critical piece now is that we don't conflate narratives. We don't conflate the narrative of the pain and the kind of the unmosqued phenomenon with the development of intentional, healthy community that will oftentimes be a mosque-based community. Some of the folks that train with us really took the whole thing seriously, and they studied it, and to be honest with you, they studied it further than we did, and really like constructed and deconstructed and packaged and unpackaged the whole third space conversation. And then in the process of all that, they're like, yeah, there's something missing with this whole development. So for them, what that led them to do is to say, oh, it's not really about just the social conversation of social, safe, and complementary space. But it's also about what does it mean for particularly spiritual communities to build intentional community in terms of the leadership, in terms of the funding models, in terms of location, special needs members in the community, making sure that those folks are thought about. That those are all things that they shouldn't be an afterthought, and it's difficult to properly address them if you just react as they come along. It's better to think about, hey, so instead of just talking about, masjid, third place, pause. Intentional community building. What does that mean? What does that look like? What does it really take? And let's begin to have a more intelligent conversation. That's what it's really about.